There are moments in a nation's life when the present becomes so loud that history can no longer remain silent. Modern Britain is living through one of those moments. To walk through Tower Hamlets, parts of Birmingham, or sections of Bradford today is to feel a shift in the social landscape. The streets look different. The food culture has expanded. Mosques now stood where warehouses once did. Political candidates speak to new kinds of constituencies. And some borough councils now represent populations that would have been unrecognizable to Britain just half a century ago. For some, this change feels like loss. For others, it feels like evolution. And out of this tension came a phrase that now dominates online debates, political speeches, and media commentary: the Islamization of the United Kingdom. But history does not move at the speed of hashtags. It moves slowly. And what Britain is living through today was not born in this century. It was prepared by the last two. So, before judgment, before fear, before conclusions, we must begin with the reality of the present. In 2021, England and Wales recorded a Muslim population of 3.87 million, representing 6.5% of the population. 10 years earlier, it was 2.71 million, or 4.8%. In just one decade, an increase of 1.16 million people. But what makes this shift historically significant is not just the number, but the weight itself. Muslim population growth alone accounted for 33% of the total population increase in England and Wales between 2011 and 2021. This was not peripheral change. This was structural change. And it is the reason the topic refuses to remain at the margins of national conversation. But numbers don't explain momentum. Age does. The Muslim population in Britain is one of the youngest religious populations in the country. The median age of British Muslims is 27, and the overall median age in the UK is 40. The median age of British Christians is 51, and over 84.5% of Muslims in England and Wales are under the age of 50. Even with this, more than half were born in Britain. That matters too, all right. Because it means what we are witnessing is not simply migration. It is generational maturation. A population raised on British soil, speaking British English, navigating British institutions, and negotiating identity between inherited faith and modern British culture. You cannot invade your birthplace. You can only evolve within it. And with demographic change comes visibility. There are now over 2,179 mosques and prayer spaces across the United Kingdom. The halal food industry contributes £1.7 billion to the UK economy and is projected to reach £2 billion by 2028. Islamic finance is not just tolerated, it is formally integrated and regulated within Britain's financial system. Muslim voices appear in politics, television, law, sport, and public life. But here is where the narrative fractures. Despite this visibility, British Muslims remain the most economically disadvantaged religious group in the country. Unemployment among Muslims stands at 6.7% compared to 4.4% nationally. Amongst Muslims aged 20 to 24, unemployment rises to 13%. Only 6% occupy higher managerial or professional roles, compared to 10% of the general population. And 40% live in the most deprived districts in the country. Historically speaking, dominant groups do not live like this. They shaped economies, they controlled resources, and they occupied power. A group struggling to access employment, influence, and wealth is not a group overtaking power. It is a group negotiating exclusion. So what, then, are we really witnessing? To answer that, history must be allowed to speak. By the time Britain began asking whether it was being Islamized, Islam had already been connected to British soil for over 1,000 years. In the 8th century, When Britain was still a patchwork of Anglo-Saxon kingdoms, an English king named Offa of Mercia minted a gold coin. This coin bore Arabic script, not decoration, but the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith. The inscription was copied directly from Abbasid currency issued under the Caliph al-Mansur. Offa was not a Muslim. He did not convert his people, but he traded with the Islamic world. This coin tells an inconvenient historical truth. Islam did not arrive in Britain through conquest. It arrived through connection. For centuries afterward, Muslim presence remained small but continuous. By the 16th century, historical records show Muslims arriving in Britain through maritime trade, diplomacy, or as captives of Mediterranean naval conflicts. Some were traders, some were enslaved sailors, and some were servants in aristocratic households. They did not form political movements. They formed footprints. Islam had already walked British streets long before the word Islamization was ever imagined. Everything changed when Britain became an empire. From the late 18th century onward, Britain ruled over vast Muslim populations across South Asia, the Middle East, and Africa. But it did not only dominate them, it depended on them. One of the most overlooked figures in British imperial history is the Lascar. Lascars were Muslim sailors recruited into the British Merchant Navy and East India Company fleets. They came from India, Bengal, Yemen, Somalia, and Southeast Asia. They powered British trade. They navigated British ships and also built its global commercial empire. But many were mistreated. Many were abandoned. And many could not afford passage home. So they stayed. By the close of the 19th century, roughly 20,000 Lascars were living in Britain. They settled in cities like London, Cardiff, Liverpool, Hull, and Glasgow. Not as conquerors, but as working men who had no route back to a world reshaped by British imperial power. In 1887, Britain's first documented mosque opened in Liverpool, not as a statement of dominance, but as a space for prayer, burial, and survival. By 1910, the London Mosque Fund was created, and by 1924, the Fazl Mosque was opened in London. These institutions existed decades before modern migration. Islam in Britain did not arrive suddenly in 1948. It had already put down quiet roots long before. By 1945, after World War II, Britain was devastated. Cities were bombed, industries damaged, labor shortages severe, and yet the economy had to function. Because of this, Britain turned to its empire. It invited workers from Pakistan, Bangladesh, and India. This was not forced immigration. It was recruited labor. Men arrived from rural Punjab and Sylhet to work in factories, hospitals, transportation, and public services. They were not seen as future citizens. They were seen as temporary solutions. But politics intervened. By the late 1960s, immigration restrictions tightened and borders began to narrow. Faced with the possibility of permanent exclusion, many migrant workers brought their families. Temporary labor turned into permanent settlement. The arrival of Muslim women in the late 1960s and early 1970s transformed these communities from transient populations into rooted societies. Nearly half of Britain's Bangladeshi population originates from a single region, Sylhet. This clustering pattern reflects chain migration. A cousin arrives, then a brother, then neighbors, and then extended family. Communities formed in places like Tower Hamlets, Birmingham, Bradford, Oldham, and Leicester, where work, housing, and emotional support were available. Critics call this self-segregation. History calls it human survival. This same pattern shaped Irish Liverpool, Jewish East London, and Caribbean Brixton. Migration always clusters before it disperses. Over time, something important happened. The population transitioned from migrant to British-born. Today, over 51% of Muslims in England and Wales were born in Britain. This is not a visiting population. It is a native one. And because it is young, it grows. The median age of British Muslims is 27 because the migrant generation gave birth to British children who then had children of their own. This is demographic momentum, not ideological expansion. Even if migration stopped, this population would keep growing because its age structure supports it. For over a century, British identity was built around rule and not coexistence. And when former colonial subjects began living inside Britain itself, it forced an unresolved question, which was, what does it mean to be British without empire? The arrival and settlement of Muslim families didn't just change demographics. It challenged an imperial identity that had never been psychologically deconstructed. In response, Britain adopted multicultural policies, encouraging communities to maintain cultural identity while participating in national life. But these policies also produced unintended outcomes. Some groups integrated economically faster. Others, especially Muslims, remained concentrated in deprived urban areas. This wasn't cultural resistance. It was structural inequality. But inequality is often misread as refusal. And from that misunderstanding, a narrative was born, which is the rise of the Islamization myth. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, a new vocabulary entered political and media discourse. These ideas were reinforced by conspiracy theories like Eurabia, which portrayed Muslim population growth as civilizational collapse. Media representation then deepened this narrative. And around 59% of British media coverage of Muslims links them to negative behavior, particularly terrorism. This is not neutral reporting. It is a narrative construction. Just as Jews, Irish Catholics, and Caribbean migrants were once turned into symbols of national decline, British Muslims became the mirror of Britain's cultural anxiety. And this narrative had consequences. By 2025, Muslims accounted for 45% of all religious hate crime victims in Britain. Following international geopolitical crises, anti-Muslim hate crimes surged by over 335% in just 4 months. When identity is weaponized, violence follows. And history shows this relentlessly. As hostility increases, identity intensifies. Some Muslims strengthened religious and political organization. Islamist groups gained ground not because of power, but because of alienation. Diaspora communities under pressure often turned inward for safety. And so Britain entered a feedback loop. Insecurity leads to identity strengthening. Identity strengthening is misread as threat. Threat narratives fuel discrimination. Discrimination deepens insecurity. And the cycle repeats. So now, after walking through the data, the history, and the identity struggle, we return to the central question. Is Britain really being Islamized? Well, we can say Britain is not experiencing religious conquest, but it is experiencing the long social consequences of its own imperial history. The real question is not whether Britain is being Islamized. The real question is whether Britain is willing to complete the story it began for itself centuries ago.